Okay, so I'm a lawyer from Sheridan's. I'm a partner there, and we are a technology and media practice. We do lots of data protection advice. So there's, sorry.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, it is on, but I don't know. Maybe you need to then
All right.
push here.
I'll press the button. Right. There's me. There's me without the beard. Okay, so the regulation is 250 pages long. We've got about 15 minutes, so it won't be a lot of detail, but I'm going to try and pick out the 10 most important things. And to give you some insight into my perspective, I'm working with companies in London. Some of them are multinational, operating across Europe. Mostly I'm considering how this is going to play out in London. Brexit aside, we can come to that later. I vote to remain, we can leave it there. And so we'll pick out 10 things. The other thing is a lot of my practice is based on ad tech. So a lot of our clients, particularly my clients, they're taking a lot of personal data, and that's their reason for their business. Often they are creating a business which can harvest data. I know that a lot of the discussion today and the whole conference is going to be about privacy, and I'm kind of, if I'm honest, coming from the other side, where I'm acting for companies who are looking to collect data, and I'm helping them to do it in a lawful way. And that does mean being respectful of people's data, but it also means taking commercial advantages if the law will allow it. Okay, so just rattle through these 10 things. The first thing is it's harmonization of the existing law. The law that we have at the moment. First of all, it's very old. It was from 1995, which is when it was originally published, the text. And it's effectively pre-internet. There was almost no internet users out there, very few websites. All these things that we've seen in that time, e-commerce, social, mobile, all these kind of things, the data processing capability is shot up, all different ways of targeting ads. And so none of those things are basically foreseen by the Data Protection Act. And now these new rules are supposed to be, one, the same set of rules for everyone. It's not a law that each nation state implements for themselves along certain guidelines. It's actually one text in different languages that each country puts into place. And secondly, it's supposed to be kind of better future-proofed. It won't be perfectly harmonized, and we do know there's some wiggle room. For example, children can be 13-year-olds, can be 16-year-olds, or somewhere between. And even though there are means of enforcing it consistently, we know there's going to be differences in enforcement. The territorial scope is wider. Better? The territorial scope is wider. Already, it would catch companies which have which are located in an EU state, even if they didn't have a subsidiary there. It could just be an office there. But now it's wider, and particularly non-EU companies are monitoring the behaviour in the EU of EU nationals. So it's going to affect more foreign companies. So we've already got this principle of privacy by design, built things so they protect privacy from the outset. This is much stronger in the new regulation. Currently, privacy impact assessments, which is basically a company comes up with a new product and then they assess how does it affect people's privacy. Assessing the impact on privacy, right? So now that's a requirement, and you've got to keep a record of that, and able to demonstrate that when you come up with a new product, it's using people's data, that you're doing that in a way which is considerate, right? Again, design. So processes. At the moment, you've got this distinction between data controllers and data processors. Controllers like the brain that decides what processing is going to happen, whereas the processor is like the hand, which is controlled by the brain, supposed to do what the brain tells it, right? So the decision making is in the hands of the controller, and that's where the regulation currently lies. Processors just have to do as they're told by the controller, and that's under contract, that's not under regulation. Now there is a kind of enforcement against processors, and they can be directly liable, so we're expecting to see agreements between controllers and processors change, because processors will want reassurance from the controller that what they're doing in providing this contract isn't going to get them in trouble. You know? For example, if the processor is taking a database and doing something with it, are the consents correct in that database? Ordinarily, that probably wouldn't constitute a breach of the contract. So this is the biggest difference is personal data itself is changing. The concept is, appears on practically every line of 250 pages, and it's now much broader. So you change that definition, you have a huge impact throughout the whole regulation. And currently, it focuses on, can you identify a person? So of all the people in this room, which one's Eitan? Right, that's me. But if now it's more focusing on singling someone out. So if in all of the people in this room, you could look at some data and say, it's this guy, we don't know who he is, but we know it's him, we can treat him differently, we can serve him different ads, we can make decisions about him. We don't even really care who he is, because frankly, consumers are often just viewed as a basket of buying habits and spending intent. So that's now really quite a big change, and the way people profile is now being covered. Anonymization, it's always okay. If it's not personally identifying, then it's not personal data. We can't single someone out. It's truly anonymous. But it means that a lot of the business models for some ad tech companies won't really work, because they're depending on cookies to be able to identify, or other identifiers to be able to treat people differently. So you get that backpack advert. That's what happened to me. I got the same backpack advert for about 2 months after I already bought the backpack, right? But they're doing that without knowing who I am, but because they're able to single me out. So the data rights, I put here, it's very similar to existing rules. It's probably not totally true, but there are more rights under the GDPR, but a lot of them kind of existed in one form or another, either under a judgment, like the right to be forgotten, or the way it was enforced in different member states. But now we have these enhanced rights of data portability, the right to be forgotten, the right well, you always had the right to verify what information was held about you and inspect that information, subject to some exemptions. So those rights are now much greater, and the whole PIMS VRM thing is a great solution to offer people those rights. If companies can implement those sorts of solutions, then those rights and far greater rights will be available to the individual. So consent. Freely given, specific, informed, revocable, that's kind of how it already was, but now we're seeing much more emphasis on clarity and transparency about collecting consents. So consents aren't supposed to be bundled. That's what happens all the time now. Consents are always bundled. They're put in a privacy policy. It might be that when you sign up to terms and conditions, you're also signing up to the privacy policy. That's what we often do as lawyers. We love that, because if you get that, if someone has to tick for something, then you might as well have them give extra affirmation. The alternative is to say that the next thing you do, unless it's back or close the browser, is your indication you're okay with what we are going to do, or maybe what we've just done in the case of cookies, which are often served before that notice even appears. Someone's smiling there, you can get that one. Now it's got to be much more, much clearer and much more granular. And it can't be, for example, conditioned on the offering of a service. You can't say, give me this consent and I'll let you have the service if the consent isn't necessary to deliver the service. So think about stuff like Facebook. Where do they go? Because, well, I'm sure they'll find a way, but a lot of what they do with personal data isn't actually necessary for operating a social network. It's necessary for monetizing that network. But it is a condition of using Facebook. You can't go on and say, make no money off me, but still provide me the bandwidth that I take up when I go online. So I've put a comment here, which is the ICO Code of Practice on privacy notices. This is something which is from the UK's data regulator, and it explains how consents might be done in future, and it's been written with the GDPR in mind. And what they talk about there is much greater use of icons, much greater use of video, giving individual requests for consent at the time. So if you're on your phone, sometimes you go on a website and it'll say, do you want to give this website access to your location data? And you think, no. The idea is you'll be served that request at the time you're on the maps page, find this restaurant or something, instead of giving it immediately. But it's this idea of a blended approach. So it's not just a request for consents which are layered, provide basic information, ask for consent. If people want more information, you can offer them that in the next layer. And now people who are more interested, more information, now it's a case of doing that, and also consent being almost part of the experience throughout. It's going to take product design teams to come up with good ways of getting consent, and people are already implementing those sorts of measures and hiring people to do that. You're also supposed to be testing the consents to make sure they actually work. Are people engaged? So it is becoming like a product design sort of methodology going into making sure that you get consent, or at least that's the intention. Whether people do it, I don't know, maybe not, but we'll see. So international transfers. Well, the big thing last year was Schrems, which was a privacy campaign, and managed to show that the whitelisting of US companies which agreed to a particular framework known as Safe Harbor didn't protect data, and therefore export of data to those companies was unlawful. Now, there are other options. There are other options which are things like entering contracts with the recipient of the data to make sure they comply with things, or implementing intra-group structures for sharing with their multinationals. But actually, the arguments Shrem used would probably defeat those too. So it hasn't been tested in court, but personally, that's a big issue exporting to the US. Thanks to Snowden, we know what's been going on, and well, some people were assuming that was happening anyway. In the UK, so thinking about Brexit, we know that Brexit will take at least 2 years, even if we started it today. So this is going to be in the UK at some point, because the regulation comes in less than 2 years. The Information Commissioner has said informally we probably wouldn't enforce it in that scenario. If it was in for 6 months, we would just pretend it wasn't happening. But that takes us on to enforcement, because other member states can enforce into other jurisdictions, subject to the appointment of a lead authority. So I'm simplifying this, but the idea is that different supervising authorities effectively take a combined decision under the lead of the authority, most likely in the territory in which the company is based. But how that will work in the case of Brexit, we don't know, because it could be that French CNIL in France could enforce into the UK even if the ICO wasn't interested. So I don't know how that's going to play out. The other thing in enforcement is the fines. The fines are huge. The fines are like the fines you would get for being anti-competitive. So great big fines, up to 4% of global turnover, which has basically got Google's name written all over it. And clearly, all those fines they've been ignoring or just happily paying and writing off or whatever. I guess they're going to pay attention now. And then hacking notifications. If you get hacked, then there's a procedure for explaining what's happened, what you've lost, and what impact it has for people. So I've got some bits here on the ad tech industry, because I think they are the most notorious / innovative / aggressive users of personal data for most consumers. Personal data is bigger, so with all the cookies and identifiers that are being used all the time, they are likely to be swept up into what's personal data. Profiling. Profiling is going to be trickier. There's some extra wording where it speaks about profiling, which is about having a legal impact, legal effect on an individual. And we need some guidance on really on what that means. And data protection law generally makes no sense if you just read the articles. You kind of have to see what that working party is saying. That's now going to be it's basically been rebranded as the Data Protection Supervisory Board. But you really need that guidance, and that's what we're all waiting for the next 12 months. Consent. We're going to have to see more affirmation. So instead of saying, by using this website, you're agreeing to us taking all of your data, that's not going to work so well. We're going to have to see more affirmation, more tick boxes, more in-time requests for consent depending on what's being done, more purpose limitation. So you're giving us consent to use this information for this limited purpose for this short period of time. Kids, in the UK actually, it's a bit of a grey area of what is a child, because it can depend on the individual child's ability and also the way the privacy policy is written. So an 8-year-old, a clued up 8-year-old can give consent, and it can be lawful as long as the privacy policy is readable to an 8-year-old. That's going to be much trickier. And the logistics of putting these things in place is going to be a big aspect of the ad tech industry. Process and liability. Now, the ad tech industry, you have a publisher which shows the ad, you have the advertiser which sells the product advertised, and then you've got 1.2 million people in the middle. You don't have a public face, no one knows they're there, they are managing the data, they are tracking the web traffic, they are making sure the commissions are paid, and those people, they're liable, so they're going to have to sort of come out of the shadows a little bit, and it's likely that they're going to be working with the publishers or the advertisers, the people who publish the ads and the people who sell the goods, to get consent from them in that way. So what does the future hold? I mean, I've got 1 minute, so I'll cut to the chase. I think that in the world at the moment, when you're using free services, there's basically a deal being done. Some people don't know that's happening, but there is a deal, and the deal is, it's an old cliche, you pay for the services with your data. You give something which is yours, or it's at least about you, and you give it to a company, it's valuable to them, and that allows them to provide you with a free service. That's why Hotmail is free, that's why Facebook's free, that's why Google's free. Now, I think that what the ad tech industry needs to do in response to this is to be clearer about that deal, make it more obvious. Yes, we want your data because that's how we monetize, and we're going to provide you the service on that basis. If you don't let us have the data, you affect how we monetize, you affect new features, our lifeblood, how we develop as a company. So if you like our services, you have to support us by giving us that data and do it willingly, not do it accidentally, which is what tends to happen. And then secondly, maybe that deal could be renegotiated. Maybe people could get a better deal, provide less data for more services, or the other way around. Maybe some services would be sort of more knowingly conditioned with appropriate notifications on more giving of personal data. But I think the idea that companies sort of pretend to be free because they love you, that's just not going to work anymore, because they're going to have to explain how they monetize. And I think that's a fair conversation with them to have. I think they should be open about it. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're private, you'll go find a different service. It's bound to be more basic because it will have less money. And if people want a bigger service, then maybe they'll offer more data. But that's my view. That's what I think will happen next. And thank you.